interesting. It wasn't so long ago that journalists and politicians, was it, across the West were derided or labelled racist for suggesting, admittedly with plenty of supporting evidence, that COVID-19 started with a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now the theory is gaining momentum, with US President Joe Biden giving intelligence officials 90 days to report on whether the virus resulted from human contact with an infected animal or from a laboratory incident. Now, for his analysis on all of this, I'm joined from Canberra by the Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Peta Jennings. Peter, great to have you on to discuss this. You've written about it in the Australian newspaper today. You're convinced it was a laboratory accident responsible for the emission of the Wuhan virus. Why is that?
I think it's the most likely hypothesis yet. There is still no immediate smoking gun, Peter, to prove that that's the case. But if you look at the wider surrounding context, it seems to me that makes for a pretty compelling tale. And just to sort of go through that very quickly, we know that China has been engaged in biological weapons developments over quite a few years. We know that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had been working with the Chinese military on classified projects. We also know from State Department cables of 2017, before the virus, that there was actually serious American concern about the biosecurity at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And in fact, at one stage, the State Department was urging the American government to help the institute get better security to prevent the leak of the virus. We also know now, and this is relatively more recent information, that a number of researchers at the institute became sick in November with something that had COVID-like symptoms, although precisely what has not been made public. And then, of course, finally, Peter, we also know that China went to enormous lengths. Xi Jinping went to enormous lengths to prevent access to the Virology Institute for over a year, to control that access when the World Health Organization went there and frankly delivered a really very weak report that refused to look credibly at the laboratory accident theory. So all of these things begin to mount a case which says that China has something to hide. And then, of course, most significantly, we've now got Biden directing his intelligence agencies to do a 90-day study to see what they can come up with. And Peter, you'd be very familiar with the old sort of axiom of politics: never commission a report unless you have a pretty good idea about what it's going to come out. I think that there is now a reasonable prospect that we will get much closer to the truth. And the truth is going to look more like something from a leak from the Institute of Virology in Wuhan rather than animal to human transfer at a wet market.
I think one of the really telling things when it very early happened was the number of dead, we were told, out of China, 3,500 thousand. Now, if you look at what's happening in India and the United States and United Kingdom, around the world, those numbers are not credible. And we had those satellite images from out of space showing that there were crematoria in Wuhan that were working 24/7, glowing so hot that they hadn't been turned off in weeks and weeks and weeks, telling you that the scale of it was nothing like Xi Jinping was prepared to admit to. How confident are you that this Biden intelligence report really will be brave enough, if they find the truth, if they find this link with the Institute, to declare that?
Well, I'm familiar with the caution of intelligence agencies to make definitive judgments. And I thought it was actually very interesting that in Biden's announcement of this review, he actually says there's one agency that's leaning towards actually calling this definitively as coming from the Institute of Virology. It is quite possible, Peter, that we will never get that definitive, precise link, but I wouldn't rule it out either. And it will come down to, a great deal of back-searching of material that intelligence agencies will have collected but may not have analysed at the time, along with anything else that can be brought to light as a result of what I imagine right now is a slightly panicked reaction inside China to the news that Biden is now, for the first time, saying America will ask direct questions of the Chinese about what happened and when. That hasn't happened until now. So there is, I think, quite a good prospect that we will get something more definitive in 90 days' time.
Okay, just quickly before we go, Facebook. They have had to reverse a very long-standing policy of censoring anyone who tried to suggest that COVID-19 was man-made. Now, they were muzzling users, claiming that they were pushing some sort of conspiracy theory. Now that Biden's out there saying this conspiracy theory must be investigated, doesn't this just highlight the real problem we have with big tech?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting issue here. I mean, I have always thought from the beginning that a leak from the Institute was a realistic possibility. And for that to be dismissed as conspiracy just immensely puzzled me. I couldn't see how, on the face of it, that would be the case. There is, of course, Peter, and I'm sure you understand the difference here, a difference between saying that there was potentially a deliberate leak. I think that's pretty unlikely. And the US intelligence community very early on in the piece said that they thought this was not synthetically altered by human intervention. But those things aside, the Wuhan Institute was working on viruses. In fact, they had a virus very, very similar in terms of its genetic makeup, 92.6% similar to the SARS virus, to the coronavirus that was actually released with COVID-19. So for all of this to be just dismissed and it can't be talked about and regarded as being somehow faintly a conspiracy theory, I think has actually done damage to what should have been a much more systematic and open attempt on the part of the Western democracies to study this more carefully. And I'm really pleased that at least looks like it's going to start now from inside the US intelligence community.
Yes, and we're all on notice with Facebook. Peta Jennings, thank you for your time. Great analysis there.
Thanks so much.